Welcome to Retirementals, a podcast that dives headfirst into the issues facing the financial sector at the intersection of investment, technology and financial advice. Hosted by Abraham Okusanya, you can expect raw honesty, critical analysis and energetic interviews. Here is your host, Abraham Okusanya.
Hello and welcome to Retirementals. It's great to have you all here today. I am really excited about my guest today. Rory Percival needs no introduction to most listeners of this podcast, but I'll give him one anyway. He's a highly influential ex-regulator, speaker, consultant to financial advice firms. His 10-year stint put him on the map, or did he put the FCA on the map? It became very, very influential in the way that the FCA thought about and regulated advisors. His brainchild includes, terms such as capacity for loss and centralized investment proposition. Rory, welcome to Retirementals.
Hi, Abraham. Very pleased to be here.
You're responsible for introducing capacity for loss as a terminology into the financial advisor lexicon. So can you talk a little bit about why this is now a mandatory requirement for advisors, and B, how you think they should go about assessing it?
You're correct in that I was involved with bringing the terminology in, but I wasn't involved with bringing the rule in. The rule stems from MiFID I, which was back in 2007. So it sits within the heart of the suitability rule in COBS 9.2, which says, in amongst other things, is that the recommendation should be such that the client is able to bear the level of risk associated with the solution recommended. So when we did the project on risk profiling and matching to investment solutions back in 2010, leading to the publication of finalized guidance 11.5 in 2011, we looked at this and we came up with, I don't think it was me, we came up with the expression capacity for loss. And it is defined by a little footnote in FG 11.5. And it's about the amount of loss that the clients can sustain without having a material impact, and that word is important, material impact on their standard of living. I think, you and others have been critical about the relevance of capacity for loss in the past. And I will go to my grave defending the importance of capacity for loss as part of the rule book. The reason being is that the rules are there to try and stop advisors giving bad advice and putting clients in a really, really bad position. And capacity for loss is a real key issue where clients can be left in a really bad position. I'll give you two examples, one about permanent loss and one about temporary loss. An advisor recommends all of the client's investments go into some dodgy unregulated investment. As is common with these things, it goes pop and they've lost all their money. They've only got the state pension to live on. That's not enough for them to, well, that has a material impact on their standard of living. They are, to all intents and purposes, destitute. They've lost their life savings. That's not great financial planning. You need a rule to say you can't do that. And capacity for loss rule is the one that says that. Second example, temporary loss. An advisor recommends client withdraws 5% per annum, let's say, from their pensions and investments. As you well know, by being the master of the sustainable withdrawal rate, 5% isn't sustainable, or the chances are that 5%, in adverse market conditions isn't sustainable. So these clients, a few months later, or a year or two later, whenever, the markets tank, they carry on taking their 5% because that's what they're advised to do. And they get to the stage, you know, got the double whammy of the investment markets going down and the 5% coming out. But of course, because the values have gone down, it's now much higher than 5% of what's left. And you get into a downward spiral which cannot be rectified at that level of withdrawal. So at the annual review, the advisor says, look, you know, this is all gone a bit pear-shaped. We can't sustain this. We're going to have to reduce your income level to 2.5% of the original amount, or 2%, or 0% for a period until the markets come back again and those levels of income are sustainable. Client says, well, how long is that going to be? And the advisor says, I don't know. It depends on the markets. Could be 2 months, it could be 6 months, it could be 18 months, it could be 3 years, who knows? So the client's sitting there thinking, so maybe a year or 2 or 3, I can't have an income, I can't go on holiday, I can't go out, I can't afford to do all those things. That's had a material impact on their standard of living for a, potentially a prolonged period. So that again is a breach of capacity for loss. When we look at people who have been scammed in the press, we feel really, really upset about that and really, really annoyed that people have done that to other people. The reason we're annoyed is because people, it's more like the first scenario where they've lost all of their life savings. And, people are in a really bad situations. You could also say, oh, well, capacity for loss is not necessary because that recommendation didn't meet their risk profile either, their attitude. That would be right. But the reason that we get upset and the reason that clients get upset is not because it didn't meet their risk profile. It's because it's breached their capacity for loss. It's had a material impact on their standard of living. So that's why capacity for loss is really, really key. Now, you might think, well, those two advanced scenarios and advisors are ones where any good advisor wouldn't recommend putting all of their money in an unregulated investment. Any advisor wouldn't recommend doing any good advisor wouldn't recommend doing 5% withdrawals because that's not potentially not sustainable. You're quite right, but you need a rule to say you have to give good advice. And it's a rule breach to give bad advice and put people in the position where there's a real material chance of them being destitute or certainly having a material impact on their standard.
No, I actually think that was a brilliant, elucidation. Is that the right word? Of this framework around capacity for loss. And one of the issues that I have said a lot about is that I think you've answered it in the sense that, the way the capacity for loss framework is often interpreted is to think of every loss in the portfolio as permanent and irrecoverable, and I can understand how that might apply to esoteric products. But the reality is that, as you pointed out to, the risk inherent in mainstream, publicly listed or globally diversified portfolio, which I advocate, many advisors do, is that the result is temporary, right? The losses are temporary. But you are quite right, absolutely, about the fact that this is, to me, in a way, this is a problem with terminology, because the very essence of what I've been advocating and talking about in the industry is that we must stress test the client's retirement plan, financial plan, and again, this goes to the crux of my argument with you, which is to say, well, if we are about testing the client's ability to bear loss, by its very definition, you can't use this straight line projection to measure it. If you are relying on the capital market to support the income, but you insist that you can.
I say you can. Don't get me wrong. My preferred approach is a stochastic approach. All I'm saying around using deterministic cash flow planning tools, etc., is that the FCA don't say you can't use deterministic, but B, if you are using deterministic, because of that exact point, you can't use in isolation straight line assumptions and leave it at that, because that is negligent, because you know that markets don't work like that. So if you are using deterministic tools, then I use my terminology here, I qualify my terminology. Normally when I say must, I'm talking about a rule, okay? And when I say should, I'm talking about a guidance, because that's how the FCA uses its terminology. But in this situation, I'm incorrectly using the word must, i.e. it's not a rule. You must do stress testing if you're doing deterministic tools. And I use the word must in that situation because I do expert witness work, and it would be the easiest thing in the world to pull apart a firm that is using a deterministic tool when it hasn't done any stress testing and it has gone belly up, because it would be negligent for them to have done that without stress testing in very obvious knowledge and demonstrable knowledge that the markets don't work that way. So you must do stress testing if you use it.
This is brilliant that you're saying this, because strangely, I agree. Now, so what I'll put to you then is that the sustainable withdrawal framework, the very essence of the idea is that you should look at the, absolute historical worst case scenario for a portfolio, including temporary or permanent, but based on the underlying asset class within that portfolio, and stress testing the client's plan over the last 100 years. And bear in mind, the data gets better and better, because every additional day, in fact month, it's an additional scenario that we're testing. So the very essence is that stress test the client's plan and make sure that the plan works in the very, very bad scenario. Isn't that one way? I know that there's a second way, which we'll talk about. Isn't that one way of evidencing, the client's capacity for loss?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the fundamental problems that a lot of firms and advisors do in the market historically, I hope it's better now, but I'm not sure how much better it is that advisory firms would be asking the client what their capacity for loss is. And I know this is part of some of the risk profiling tools have a separate section on asking the client about capacity for loss. You're guaranteed to get the wrong answer if you do that, because the clients don't know it's a mathematical calculation, and they won't be able to divorce their emotional feelings around risk from the factual numbers base that capacity for loss is around. So you never, ever, ever ask the client what the capacity for loss is. You should find out what their income needs are, and then you do the planning, the cash flow planning, the stress testing, and does their standard of living, are you able to maintain their standard of living in the event of worst case scenarios? And it's that stress testing that is the testing against the capacity for loss. So capacity for loss doesn't happen at the interaction of the client and the advisor. So it's not a case of talking to the client about it. It's an analysis piece that happens behind the scene by the advisor or by the paraplanner who's ever putting that plan together.
So we introduced, a capacity for loss measuring timeline, and essentially the way we basically approach this is to measure the proportion of the client's income that will be maintained in the worst case scenario for the portfolio they're investing in. And then we benchmark that against the PALSA's retirement living standard to kind of estimate the the impact on their lifestyle. Now, we've shown that to you, and you've kind of suggested to us, well, we have to, not just measure against the Pulsar living standard, but measure against the client's own income needs and requirements, which we're doing. But my sense is that vast majority of firms aren't in a place where they can measure this objectively, benchmark against well thought out industry standards. By that I mean the Pulsars, and I haven't seen yet a robust way that people do this in other tools. So my sense is that you're right in saying that this is an area that needs a lot of thinking, a lot more improvement in the way that advisors approach this. But I don't expect that it's going to change anytime soon.
That's unfortunate. Yeah, because I think the point about this capacity for loss is some people get in the mindset that this is an FCA concept that sits in isolation, is there purely because the FCA are awkward and don't know anything about financial planning and all the rest of it. Again, I'll go to my grave arguing against that. A, that's wrong, and B, you don't have to. This is the old thing about being you don't have to have done the job to understand how it works. The number of times I've seen people in comments under the line in articles saying, "Oh well, you haven't been a financial advisor for 20 years to know to know enough about this." Well, I've been in the sector for 34 years, not much of it as advisor, some of it, but I'm a chartered financial planner. I know how financial planning works, and so do a very large number of people at the FCA. It's just a complete nonsense. And going back to what I was saying about capacity for loss earlier, and explaining why it's important from a planning perspective about not leaving people destitute, you tell me that that's a bad rule. You can't. Of course, you need that rule in there.
I agree, and the other thing the other criticism that's often said about capacity for loss is that, and I think that you would agree with this, is specifically in the paper, the FCA sort of glosses over the impact of, or the likely impact of inflation in the framework, because although you might say to a client, well, you're not going to be able to bear the loss that is, let's put ourselves in a scenario 2 that you highlighted earlier on. So you say to a client, well, look, you might not be able to bear the losses, temporary or permanent, that are associated with this portfolio, and therefore, we reduce your income temporary. And again, I should say that, if you're using timeline, you can demonstrate to the client what kind of reduction that's going to be, and essentially agree that with the client and see the impact on their lifestyle. But then let's say you say to the client, well, you can't cope with the losses that are associated with this portfolio. And therefore what? Don't invest. Sit in cash, and many advisors are going to say, well, actually, that offers no improvement on the situation. To the client.
You raise a very valid point there, Abraham, and the issue is not about what you do with that investment risk level. And one of the perhaps the misleading things about the capacity for loss being in the connection of risk is the solution isn't risk-based. The solution is financial planning based. So if you're modeling a client situation with their objectives of having a certain level of income in retirement, the pot size is whatever it is at the moment, and you're coming up with figures that just don't work, frankly. Let's say you've got success rate of 60%, 70%, 80%, that's still a plan that's not, running too high a risk of breaching the client's capacity for loss. If you've got those kind of numbers, the solution isn't taking more risk. The solution isn't taking less risk. The solution is doing a different plan. The plan doesn't work. So you go back to financial planning to resolve that issue. Now, the main levers are retiring later. What's it look like if they retire a year later or even 6 months later? What's it look like if they do some part-time work after retirement? If they were planning that anyway, what's it look like if they do it for a little bit longer or at a slightly higher rate? What happens if they save more? What happens if they scale down their objectives, their income objectives, but still to be what is going to meet their standard of living?
What happens if they die sooner?
It's all of those are planning levers. The solution is planning.
Okay, no, I tend to agree. No, I tend to agree with a lot of those, because you don't want to, the solution necessarily isn't to say, well, take more risk than you should and you can. It's coming up with moving all the other levers, potentially that you can. Okay, so that's clear. Now, I want to move on now to your views on retirement income specifically. I think I can say that indeed the FCA generally subscribe to this idea that I call it a safety first approach, which is to say, well, actually, you should only expose, you shouldn't expose a client to a client's essential income to the capital market. So you should only expose, to the capital market after you've secured, the essential income. And there are a number of problems with it. This one is that you don't agree with my characterization of your philosophy around this. So I guess we should start from, well, what is your sort of broad guideline on how you approach retirement income in this regard?
Okay. You use different expressions in there, so some of it mischaracterized it, some of it didn't. So and ditto the FCA. The FCA don't take a safety first approach as it is commonly defined. What it does believe, I believe, and I believe myself, is that security in retirement is very, very important. Okay. Now, I prefer to use secure rather than guaranteed. And not even preferred, I would always in this context use secured rather than guaranteed. Now, I think the misunderstanding perhaps arises about how you generate security in retirement. I would say that there are broadly three ways or scenarios where you could have security in retirement. The first one is your income sources are secure. So that's to say state, pension, DB, annuity, guaranteed third way, etc. That's pretty much it. So those very, very secure, and in some cases guaranteed, income sources. Now, that's open. I don't know if you think this, but some people will think when the FCA are talking about securing income, they are talking about you have to use those secure income sources to give you security in retirement. That's wrong. That's just one of three ways, I would say. Okay. Second way is a lot of clients, and particularly clients of a lot of advisory firms, are pretty well off.
Right.
They have a lot of money, and okay, they might have high income needs for their meet their standard of living, but maybe not astronomical. They are in a position where they're sufficiently well off that irrespective of what happens in the markets, they're always going to be fine. They're always going to meet their standard of living. Now, there's quite a lot of clients in that situation. Okay, we are talking fairly really well off here. There's probably a third category that kind of sits in the middle, perhaps, which is people who do, you do need to do some planning to ensure longevity of the pension pot and other assets pots, to ensure they have enough money to live on throughout retirement. But certainly the essential expenditure, and depending on the client, potentially the lifestyle expenditure as well, you should aim to be more secure with that income source to cover those income needs. Now, if you're using a tool such as Timeline, which, as you know, I think is a very good tool. I haven't done it.
Oh, thank you.
I haven't done an under the bonnet analysis, but broadly, knowing how it works, I think it's very good. If you're using a tool like that, what I would suggest is that where possible, you have either a proportion or, well, let's say a proportion of your assets that you're having a withdrawal rate that you're pretty damn sure is sustainable under any circumstances. So I'm talking 99, 100% here. Okay, so that would be a lower return rate, obviously, than a 90%, 95% security success rate, or 90%. But what I'm saying is, if you're at those very, very high probability percentages, then you've created that security there, a great level of security there. If you can't do that, there's got to be a compromise somewhere. And the solution again is either planning, retiring later, scaling down income or whatever, or potentially the client accepting a 95% rather than a 99, 100% figure.
Now, a word from our sponsor. Nikki Heaton-Jones is the Managing Director and the Chief Investment Officer at Betafolio, the high-tech, low-cost, discretionary model portfolio manager. Why do you think that the investment industry as a whole make these things unnecessarily complicated?
I think it's become self-fulfilling in a way. It's the holy grail to find the investment approach that will reliably beat the market. And I think we shouldn't ignore the element that it's been a great way for businesses to make money as well. If you appear to be employing large teams of economists and strategists carrying out complex processes, then it's easier to justify a high fee for those services and to make a nice profit.
Thank you very much, Nikki. We did an analysis of frankly, thousands and thousands of plans built on Timeline, and we found that something in the order of more than 50%, more than half of the plan has a success rate of 90% or more, right? And there's an additional 15% that has 80% or more, which we considered sustainable. 90% we say highly sustainable, but you're saying 90+%. But we'll come back to this. What fascinates me about this discussion is that clearly in our case we actually have advisors who've tested this. Now we can debate the level of the success rates and things like that, which tends to tend towards the very high, but then there is a huge proportion of plans that are built on deterministic models that haven't tested this kind of scenarios. Maybe the advisors dropped losses every 5 years, or in a way that is incoherent and consistent with the way the capital market works. So I'm saying to you, well, if you're really going to start there, if you're really going to start talking about this problem, well, maybe that's where we should start. No?
You're not going to get me to say you can't use deterministic tools.
Okay, well,
But what I'm going back to what I was saying earlier, if you are using as I said earlier,
I think it's fine to use
I think stochastic tools are better, but I don't think you can't use deterministic tools. The simplicity of deterministic tools can work well with some clients. But if you are using deterministic tools, you must stress test them, and you must do that in a sensible and robust way.
Right. So let me post a scenario to you. I think deterministic tools are fine, right? If with a huge if you follow, what I describe as the safety first, philosophy. In other words, clients a client walks in and you secure all, if not, as much as possible of their essential spending, and to an extent, lifestyle spending as well. You secure that, with guaranteed sources of income. So let me give you a scenario. A client's working, let's just assume, she's single, she is in her 60s, right? Approaching the state pension age, and comes in, let's just keep it simple, with a portfolio of £300,000, right? And after you've gone through the analysis of their income and their expenditure and all that stuff, right? I'm deliberately choosing a borderline scenario. The client needs 20,000, maybe 20,000 pounds in essential spending. We know that half of that is going to come from state pension potentially. So you analyze that, and so then therefore they need about they need about 15 grand. I'm thinking of this number. Yeah, let's even say, yeah, they need about 15 grand, to meet their comfortable type of lifestyle. They need 20 for the essential, 25 for a decent lifestyle, and anything over and above that is of course is great. I'm keeping this deliberately simple. Now they have a home that is paid for, or that will soon shortly be paid for. If a client walks into my office with that scenario, well, under the safety first approach, what you would do will be to say, well, you have 9,500, maybe 10,000 pounds worth of secured income. Let's go off and buy an annuity for 10,000 pounds. And Mrs. or Miss Client, I hate to break it out to you, you will need to spend all of your pension pot, to do that. I think if you're following that framework of advice, I don't necessarily believe that it's the right approach. But if you're following that framework, well, yeah, sure, use a deterministic model. I think the problem comes if you come to a probability type framework. Well, essentially, I'm going to say, well, what's the worst case scenario that could happen, in a balanced portfolio, for a 250,000 portfolio, say 3%, adjusted for inflation, all of that stuff. That's 15 grand added to the baseline, state pension. You are actually going to be okay in the worst case scenario. But guess what? You have a lot of flexibility, because vast majority of scenarios are going to be better than the worst case scenarios. So that's the way I would approach this. Now, you're saying there is maybe something in the middle. So we say secure 75% of the income, which is still going to cost a lot of their pension fund. How would you approach that in the real world? Bear in mind, there's still the property asset that's not part of this conversation.
Yeah. Right. There's a lot of points here. The first point is £1 of secure income is worth more than £1 of unsecure income. So what I mean by that is because it gives you more peace of mind and financial security than the unsecure income. So let's pick some random numbers. You would have throwing around 20,000 before. If a client has, on the one hand, the option of £20,000 of secure income, how much unsecure income would they accept before they would give up that 20,000 secure income if they were given the choice. No rational person would say, I'm happy having £20,000 of unsecure income instead of £20,000 of secure income. That's not a rational decision to make. So some people might say, well, if you were to offer me 25,000 unsecure income, then I'll happily take that instead of the 20,000 secure. Others might say 30,000. Others might say, well, not at all. I need it to be secure. That will vary according to all sorts of things like the client's views, but also what do you actually mean by unsecure and stuff like that. But philosophically, £1 of secure income is worth more than £1 of unsecure income. That's a really, really important thing. So people talk about annuities being bad value for money. I would say, well, that's because you're just looking at the pounds that you get. The pounds that you get are worth more than the pounds that you would get from an alternative unsecure approach. It's exactly the same conceptually as investing in the markets versus having a risk-free deposit. And okay, this is a few months out of date, but let's say you get 1% return on deposit. You're not going to invest in the markets and building in risk if your long-term return is only going to be 1%, are you? Then you've got to have an equity risk premium. It's the same conceptual point. Okay. That is part of a bigger issue around, and I accuse you in this category, and you know I do because we've had this conversation before.
Sure, nail me to the mast. Go on,
about the focus on the overriding focus on maximum pounds. And a lot of financial planners and people in the advice sector talk about how do you maximize the pounds for clients. It's not just about maximizing pounds. It's primarily about achieving clients' objectives. And part of that, a big part of that, is having financial security. I'll give you another example of how this pounds bit, advisors get this pounds bit wrong. It's all about the pounds. Last week, I was doing some awards judging, okay, and there was a case study. And in the case study, the client had a holiday property. And most of the entrants would say something about the property, like put it in a discretionary trust. There was IHT planning going on here. Sell it because they're only using it. It's £500,000 and they're only using it 4 times a year. Give it to the son and pay commercial rent. Doing all rented out, holiday let, and all the rest of it. But the ones that just said, "Oh, we'll just sell it," is, you know, they're only getting 4 weeks worth out of that. It's not worth it. I just thought that's just wrong, because that's just thinking about the pounds. There's no mention in the advisor's response about asking the client what their views are about this and how they value that asset. And this is I know about this personally because I've been in the same situation. Up until a few months ago, my wife and I had a flat in Inverness, not £500,000, it was only about 100,000. We bought it 10 years ago for £112,000 and we sold it back in November for £102,000. So we lost £10,000 on it over 10 years.
Wow.
And we didn't let it out during that whole period. We would go every couple of months for a long weekend. We'd have a week or two over Christmas and a week here in May. Financially, in terms of pounds, that was stupid. You're nodding, absolutely. It would have been much cheaper to have got Airbnb, hired a flat and all the rest of it. Would I do that again, taking us back to 2010? Absolutely. Best financial decision we've ever made, because the value of that flat to us personally is having our own place, our own things there, our ability to turn up and be there in our own space was worth that. And sometimes financial planners and others in the sector here focus on the maximum pounds rather than the value of those pounds that it gives to people.
This is actually quite powerful. I mean, I'm thinking in my head as you're talking, maybe again wrong, how you quantify the sort of the emotional the emotional benefit, you know, of a secured income, or and of course you match that to unsecured income, as you, I would say, emotional benefit of a secured income, guaranteed income versus sustainable income, in the narrow sense of the capital market. But I think it's very important. I mean, some of the stuff that we're doing with Timeline, which is to essentially ask the client in a fact find, you know, tool, you know, something that they spend money on, we know what the essential is, but other things we can quantify, we can ask them, you know, whether this is kind of, you know, must have, like to have, dream to have, or dream of, and somehow weight that, so, you know, in terms of, you know, the emotional benefit of it is still miles off, but I think it's a fascinating point. Look, let's start to wrap this up. You know, the other point I wanted to take you through, you know, I don't think we have enough time to do it, is essentially the FCA has just introduced it, you know, DBAT, is that what you would call it? Defined Benefit Advice Assessments tool. First of all, can you talk a little bit about this and what it's trying to do, and, you know, specifically around, you know, this prioritization of, you know, retirement income need that they brought into the framework?
Yeah. Okay. DBAT, or however it's pronounced, I think all advisors should have a look at this, and more particularly the guidance that goes with it. You look at the guidance, it's over 100 pages, you think, oh God. You start reading it and it's written by a lawyer. It's so obviously written by a lawyer. So, but there's some real gems in there. I think the best thing to do, if you can't cope with the full 100 pages of lawyer speak, is to focus on the examples of unsuitability in there. And there are also examples of you know, unacceptable disclosure as well. But let's just focus on the suitability bit. This doesn't just apply to defined benefit transfers. Those sort of are examples of unsuitability you can view much more widely about retirement income planning. So that's why I say all advisors stroke firms should look at this, not just pension transfer firms, specialists. So some key things in there. But the overriding point that comes through this is that you need to look at what's in the client's best interests in terms of the retirement planning. And there are must-haves, which is retirement income, and an income that's going to work for them and meet their objectives in retirement. There are nice-to-haves, like flexibility, death benefits, etc. But you need to prioritize the must-haves, the retirement income. The nice-to-haves only come along, you can only look at those if you've got the retirement income bit buttoned down, okay? Now, what comes through from that, coincidentally, I was reading an ombudsman decision this morning, and they were very, very in tune with the same concept, which is the clients might express objectives around flexibility, death benefits, and the other things that drawdown give you. But to an extent, you as advisors need to put those aside because they are nice to have and prioritize the client's income. And I think from a planning perspective, and as somebody who is moving into retirement himself, this becomes very, very pertinent. You know, 35, 40 years of retirement and the need for my income sources to survive that period is mildly alarming. I'm confident about it as it happens, but you know, it is, and you know, you're too young to be worried about these things. But when you actually hit the point, it is a big deal. So advisors need to prioritize the income, the must-haves over the nice-to-haves. If you think that that's being paternalistic, it is. If you think that flies in the face of pension freedoms, you know, it's the client's money, it's their choice. Yes, it does. But that's how the FCA rules work.
This is fascinating, and you bring us very, very nicely into kind of my wrap-up questions, which is, you're semi, is it fair to say you're semi-retired now? I don't know if that terms, but you're winding down work. And can you tell our audience how you've sort of planned and structured your own retirement income, and what you get up to these days?
How I structured my own retirement? Well, the first thing, of course, I went and saw a good financial planner. I would like to say she is an extraordinarily good financial planner, and she's plotted, done the cash flow planning, done all the stress testing and all the planning out and such like, to understand that yes, we are secure in our retirement. How that works out in practice is next couple of years I'm still doing non-executive roles and some expert witness work and such like. So that'll be enough to live on for the next couple of years. After that, we'll have to start drawing income from different sources. And at some point, my wife's got a couple of very good DB schemes, which will provide a very good core level of income and core level of security in there.
That's interesting. So you're leaving the guaranteed income till later and drawing the consultancy, of course, and then drawdowns, and then the guaranteed income.
We're like, my wife's not 55 yet, or 57 if it changes or whatever. So we won't be taking the DB scheme now because you can't. But it's a as people say, it's a developing process. So we haven't made the decision. The financial planner hasn't said categorically what we should do about the DB scheme. It could be that we take it when my wife's 55. It could be that it's a bit later. It probably will be a bit later because we've got my own income for the next couple of years.
Cool stuff. Very, very good. And so what do you get up to other than reading Ombudsman? We're recording this on Monday. Other than reading the Ombudsman stuff on Monday morning, what else do you get up to?
Walking, traveling, orienteering, volunteering, local history stuff, all the usual bits and bobs that people do in retirement. Yeah.
Good. We're still going to be seeing you at, one or two industry conferences a year when we get back to that. Yeah.
It'll take me quite a while to get to the stage where I'm not putting my nose in and commenting about stuff.
Rory
You might
Percival.
see the odd comment after articles or on Twitter for a little while yet.
Cool stuff. Rory Percival, thanks for your time and for your wisdom and for your contribution to the profession. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be remiss if I don't thank my incredible team who worked very hard to put this program together, led by my producer, Hannah Dickinson. Thank you very much, guys. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Timeline App, the retirement planning software, and Batefolio, the high-tech, low-cost flat fee model portfolio manager. And to you, our listeners, thank you for your time. I hope you've had as much fun listening to the program as we have making it. You can find more about the show at retirementals.co.uk, and you can follow me on Twitter. My handle is Abraham on Money. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.